Black founder removed before $840 million sale. One call stopped the entire deal. The conference room went silent when the security guard placed his hand on Daniel Brooks's shoulder. "Sir, you need to leave." Daniel stared at him. "Leave?" "Yes, immediately." 20 minutes earlier, Daniel had been sitting at the head of the table, preparing to sign the biggest deal of his life, a proposed $840 million acquisition of the technology company he had built from a tiny apartment. Now, the same company was telling him he was no longer welcome inside it. Daniel looked through the glass wall at the executives who refused to meet his eyes. One of them quietly whispered, "He's finished." But they were wrong, because Daniel still had one phone call left to make, and that call would bring the entire $840 million deal to a halt. 7 years earlier, Daniel Brooks had been working 2 jobs. During the day, he repaired medical equipment at a small hospital. At night, he built software designed to help hospitals predict when critical machines might fail. It wasn't glamorous. His apartment was tiny. His desk was an old kitchen table. His computer was secondhand. But Daniel had watched too many nurses panic when a life support machine suddenly stopped working. He wanted to prevent that. His first prototype failed repeatedly. His second prototype was rejected by 3 hospitals. His third was laughed at by an investor who told him, "Hospitals aren't going to trust technology built by someone nobody knows." Daniel went home that night disappointed. But the next morning, he started again. Then something happened that changed everything. An elderly janitor named Mr. Lewis noticed Daniel working late in the hospital basement. "You always here?" the old man asked. "Most nights." "You eat?" Daniel laughed. "Sometimes." Mr. Lewis disappeared for a few minutes and returned with half of his dinner. "You need this more than I do." Daniel refused at first, but Mr. Lewis insisted. That simple meal became one of Daniel's most important memories. Years later, when Daniel's company became successful, he never forgot that kindness. He created a company policy guaranteeing free meals for overnight hospital staff and maintenance workers using his technology. He also created scholarships for students from low-income families. Daniel believed success wasn't about how high you climbed. It was about how many people could climb with you. Eventually, his software became widely used. Hospitals began reporting fewer emergency equipment failures. Investors finally noticed. The small company that Daniel had started at a kitchen table became a rapidly growing technology firm. Employees loved him because he knew their names. When an employee's mother became seriously ill, Daniel personally helped arrange flexible working hours. When a young programmer couldn't afford graduate school, Daniel paid the first semester's tuition. When an employee made a serious mistake, Daniel didn't humiliate them. He asked, "What happened, and how do we make sure it doesn't happen again?" His company grew because people believed in him. Then came the $840 million offer. A major international corporation wanted to acquire Daniel's company. The number was unbelievable, $840 million. The board scheduled the final meeting for a Friday morning. Daniel arrived early. He wore a simple dark suit. Before entering the room, he stood quietly in the hallway and remembered the old kitchen table where it had all begun. He smiled. "This is for everyone," he whispered. But when he walked into the conference room, something felt different. His chief financial officer wouldn't look at him. The board chairman kept checking his phone. And the company's outside attorney immediately asked everyone to close the doors. Daniel sat down. "What happened?" The chairman cleared his throat. "Daniel, there has been a change in leadership." Daniel frowned. "What kind of change?" The attorney slid a document across the table. Daniel read it. His hands became still. The document claimed that Daniel had been removed as CEO because of alleged strategic disagreements and concerns regarding executive stability. Daniel looked up. "You're removing me today." The chairman avoided his eyes. "The acquisition will proceed more smoothly without you." Daniel stared at the people around the table. These were people he had trusted. People whose salaries he had helped create. People whose families had benefited from the company he built. And now they were removing him minutes before the sale. Daniel slowly pushed the document back. "Who made this decision?" The chairman said nothing. Daniel understood. The buyers had demanded control. And some board members believed Daniel was the obstacle. They thought once he was removed, the $840 million deal would be completed. Then the security guard arrived. "Mr. Brooks, I'm sorry, but you need to leave." Daniel stood. He didn't yell. He didn't insult anyone. He simply picked up his briefcase. Before leaving, he looked at his former employees through the glass wall. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked shocked. Daniel gave them a small nod. Then he walked out. In the parking lot, Daniel sat inside his car. For several minutes, he didn't start the engine. He looked at his phone. Hundreds of messages were appearing. What happened? Are you okay? Is the deal still happening? Daniel didn't know what to say. Then his phone rang. It was Mr. Lewis, the elderly janitor who had once shared his dinner with him. Daniel answered. "Hello, son," Mr. Lewis said. "I heard what happened." Daniel was surprised. "How did you hear already?" "I've been watching the news." Daniel smiled sadly. "I guess I'm not CEO anymore." There was a long pause. Then Mr. Lewis asked, "Did they take the company?" Daniel looked through the windshield at the building. "They're trying to." Mr. Lewis laughed softly. "Trying ain't the same as doing." Daniel smiled. Then Mr. Lewis said something that Daniel would never forget. "Don't fight them because you're angry. Fight for the people who trusted you." Daniel closed his eyes, and suddenly, he knew exactly what to do. Daniel made one call. Not to the media, not to a lawyer, not to the police. He called the company's original intellectual property attorney, a woman named Rebecca Morgan. Rebecca had helped Daniel file the first patent years earlier. She answered immediately. "Daniel, they removed me. I know. They're trying to close the acquisition today." Rebecca became silent. Then Daniel asked, "Can they legally do it?" Rebecca opened the original corporate documents. "Give me 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, she called back. "Daniel, did you authorize the transfer of the core patents?" "No." "Did you authorize the sale of the controlling voting shares?" "No." "Did you sign any agreement allowing the board to transfer them without your approval?" "No." Rebecca paused. "Then the $840 million deal cannot close the way they're planning." Daniel's heart started beating faster. Why? Because the most valuable technology, the technology the buyer is paying for, isn't owned by the company in the way they think. Daniel sat upright. "What do you mean?" Rebecca explained. Years earlier, when Daniel had created the original technology, he had placed the core intellectual property into a separate nonprofit research foundation. The foundation existed to fund medical technology research and provide free access to hospitals that couldn't afford expensive systems. The company had exclusive commercial licensing rights, but the patents themselves were protected. And Daniel was the foundation's controlling trustee. The board could remove him as CEO. They could restructure the company. They could even negotiate a sale. But they couldn't transfer the core patents without proper authorization. Rebecca asked, "Do you want me to stop the deal?" Daniel looked at the company building. He thought about the executives who had betrayed him. Then he remembered Mr. Lewis. "Fight for the people who trusted you." "Yes," Daniel said, "but do it legally." Inside the conference room, the executives were celebrating. The buyer's representatives had arrived. The lawyers were reviewing final documents. Someone ordered champagne. The chairman smiled. "Once we sign, it's done." Then the lead attorney's phone rang. He answered. His expression changed immediately. "What?" Everyone stopped talking. He listened. Then he slowly placed the phone on the table. "We have a problem." The buyer's CEO frowned. "What kind of problem?" "The core patents cannot be transferred." Silence. "What do you mean?" "The foundation has not authorized the transfer." The chairman stood. "That's impossible." The attorney looked at him. "Who owns the foundation?" Nobody answered. Then someone whispered, "Daniel." The room went completely silent. The buyer's CEO stood up. "You removed the founder without securing the intellectual property." The chairman's face went pale. "We thought." "You thought." The buyer slammed the folder shut. "We are not paying $840 million for a company that doesn't control the technology we're buying." He walked out. Within minutes, the entire acquisition collapsed. The champagne remained unopened. But Daniel didn't celebrate. Instead, he went to the hospital where he had once worked. He found Mr. Lewis sitting in the cafeteria. Daniel placed 2 cups of coffee on the table. "Mr. Lewis smiled. So, the deal stopped. Good. Daniel laughed. I thought you'd say congratulations. Mr. Lewis shook his head. Money isn't the victory. Daniel looked at him. Then what is? Mr. Lewis pointed toward the hospital hallway. A nurse walked past pushing equipment. That, he said, knowing your work is still helping people. Daniel looked through the glass. A machine displaying vital information was running smoothly. The same kind of machine he had once watched fail. Daniel became emotional. For a moment, he remembered everything. The tiny apartment, the rejected prototypes, the nights without sleep, the half-eaten dinner Mr. Lewis had given him, the first hospital that believed in him, and the people who had stood beside him when nobody else did. Daniel wiped his eyes. I almost forgot why I started. Mr. Lewis smiled. That's what happens when the numbers get too big. The story could have ended there. But Daniel made a decision nobody expected. He returned to the company. Not as CEO. Not as an angry founder demanding revenge. He returned as a shareholder and employee advocate. He requested an independent investigation into the attempted removal. The investigation revealed something disturbing. Several executives had secretly negotiated personal bonuses tied to the completion of the $840 million sale. They weren't simply trying to remove Daniel because of strategic disagreements. They were trying to make themselves richer. Daniel could have destroyed them publicly. Instead, he asked the board to make sure employees wouldn't suffer because of the executives' actions. He insisted that no innocent employee lose their job. He also demanded stronger corporate protections so that founders, employees, and minority shareholders couldn't be pushed aside through secret agreements. The board eventually apologized. Some executives resigned, others were removed, and the buyer returned months later with a new offer. This time, Daniel had conditions: employee protections, long-term investment in medical research, scholarship funding, free access for hospitals serving low-income communities, and transparent governance. The new offer was smaller. But Daniel accepted it, because this time, the deal wasn't just about money. It was about purpose. Years later, Daniel stood in front of a university auditorium filled with students. A young student raised her hand. Mr. Brooks, what's the most important lesson you've learned from building a company? Daniel smiled. Never confuse being successful with being valuable. The room became quiet. He continued. People will measure your success with money, titles, buildings, and numbers. But when all of that disappears, what remains is how you treated people when you had power. He looked toward the audience. Someone once gave me half of his dinner when I had almost nothing. Mr. Lewis was sitting in the front row. Daniel pointed toward him. That small act of kindness changed my life. The students applauded. Mr. Lewis smiled and shook his head. Daniel continued. So if you ever think your kindness is too small to matter, remember this. He paused. You may never know how far it travels. Daniel never forgot the day he was removed from his own company. But he also never forgot what happened afterward. He learned that losing a title doesn't mean losing your purpose. Being betrayed doesn't mean you have to become bitter. And sometimes, the strongest response isn't revenge. It's integrity. Because the people who tried to take Daniel's company thought the most valuable thing he had built was worth $840 million. They were wrong. The most valuable thing Daniel built was trust. And unlike a business deal, trust can't be bought, sold, or taken away. It can only be earned. And sometimes, one person standing calmly for what is right is enough to stop an entire room from making the wrong decision.